My parents refused to walk me down the aisle until the priest revealed the truth that silenced the room. Those words still echo in my head like a song I can't stop humming. My name is Ava, and this is the story of the day my perfect wedding turned into a battlefield of secrets, tears, and revelations that no one saw coming. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where are you watching this from? Drop a comment with your city or country, and let's see how far this story travels. Now, let's step into the chaos of that day in a small church in upstate New York, where the air was thick with love, tension, and unspoken truths. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The white dress hugged my frame, the veil trailing behind me like a whisper of dreams. The church smelled of roses and polished wood, and sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbows on the pews. My fiancé, Ethan, waited at the altar, his smile nervous but warm, his blue eyes locking with mine as I stood at the back of the aisle. Everything felt right, except for one thing. My parents, Linda and Robert, weren't by my side. They weren't even in the front row. They sat stiffly in the third pew, their faces tight, their arms crossed. They'd refused to walk me down the aisle, and the sting of that rejection burned deeper than I could admit. Let me take you back to the morning of the wedding. The venue was a charming little chapel in the Hudson Valley, surrounded by rolling hills and autumn leaves in shades of crimson and gold. My best friend, Sarah, was fussing over my dress, her laughter filling the bridal suite as she adjusted my veil. "Ava, you're glowing," she said, her eyes sparkling. But I could barely smile. My parents' decision hung over me like a storm cloud. Mom and Dad had always been traditional. They raised me in a modest home in Albany, where Sunday dinners were sacred and family loyalty was everything. When Ethan proposed, they seemed happy, at first. Ethan was a high school history teacher, kind, steady, with a laugh that made everyone feel at ease. But as the wedding plans grew, so did their disapproval. "He's not right for you," Mom would say, her voice sharp. "You're rushing into this," Dad would add, his eyes avoiding mine. They never explained why, just dropped vague hints about knowing better and protecting the family. I thought it was just their overprotective nature, but their refusal to walk me down the aisle felt like a betrayal. The guest list was small, about 80 people. There was Ethan's mom, Diane, a warm woman who treated me like her own daughter. My older sister, Claire, was there too, though she'd been distant lately, always checking her phone, avoiding my questions. Then there were cousins, aunts, uncles, and a few close friends, all smiling, oblivious to the tension brewing beneath the surface. The organ played softly, and the priest, Father Michael, a kind man with gray hair and a gentle voice, stood ready to guide us through the vows. Everything looked perfect, like a Pinterest board come to life. But I could feel it. Something was off. The way Mom's lips pressed into a thin line, the way Dad stared at the floor, the way Claire fidgeted in her seat. It was like they were all holding their breath, waiting for something to break. I stood at the back of the church, my hands trembling as I gripped my bouquet of white lilies. Sarah squeezed my arm. "You've got this, Ava," she whispered. I nodded, but my heart raced. Why wouldn't they walk with me? What was so wrong with Ethan that they couldn't even pretend to support me? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus on Ethan's face at the altar. He was my anchor, my reason to keep going. But as I took my first step down the aisle alone, I heard a murmur ripple through the crowd. Heads turned, eyes darted to my parents, then back to me. The weight of their stares pressed against my chest, and I knew this wasn't just about a walk down the aisle. Something bigger was at play, something I couldn't see yet. As I moved forward, I caught Mom's gaze. Her eyes were cold, almost defiant, but there was something else there. Guilt, maybe? Dad wouldn't even look at me. Claire, sitting next to them, shifted uncomfortably, her hands twisting in her lap. Ethan's mom, Diane, gave me an encouraging smile from the front row, but it didn't ease the knot in my stomach. I reached the altar, and Ethan took my hand, his warmth grounding me for a moment. "You're beautiful," he whispered, and I managed a small smile. But the whispers from the pews grew louder, like static in my ears. I glanced back at my parents, and for the first time, I noticed a man in the back row I didn't recognize. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a tense expression. Who was he? Why was he here? Father Michael began the ceremony, his voice calm and steady, but I could barely focus. My mind raced with questions. Why were my parents so against this? What weren't they telling me? And why did that stranger in the back keep staring at Ethan like he knew him? The air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. I squeezed Ethan's hand, trying to anchor myself, but the unease grew. Something was coming, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. The ceremony pressed on, but the weight of those whispers clung to me like damp air. Father Michael's voice droned softly, guiding us through the opening prayers, but my eyes kept darting to the pews. My parents sat rigid, their faces like stone. Mom's fingers gripped the edge of her purse, her knuckles white. Dad stared at his shoes, his jaw tight. Claire, my sister, kept glancing at them, then at me, her expression unreadable. The stranger in the back row hadn't moved, his eyes fixed on Ethan with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Who was he? A family friend I'd forgotten? A distant relative? I leaned closer to Ethan, whispering, "Do you know that guy in the back?" He followed my gaze, and for a split second, his smile faltered. "No idea," he murmured, but his voice sounded too quick, too tight. The organ's soft hum faded as Father Michael asked us to face each other for the vows. Ethan's hands were warm in mine, but I could feel a slight tremble in his fingers. I wanted to believe it was just nerves. We were getting married, after all. But something felt wrong. The crowd was too quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. I caught Sarah's eye in the front row, and she gave me a small nod, but even her usual warmth seemed strained. Then I heard it, a low murmur from my parents' side of the church. Mom leaned toward Dad, whispering something sharp, her eyes flashing. Dad shook his head, his lips pursed. Whatever they were saying, it wasn't about the flowers or the music. As I turned back to Ethan, ready to say my vows, a voice cut through the quiet. "This is a mistake." It was Mom, her words sharp enough to slice through the room. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My heart stopped. I turned to see her standing, her face flushed, her eyes locked on me. "Ava, you can't do this." The church went silent, the kind of silence that feels like it could shatter glass. Ethan's grip on my hands tightened, and I could feel his pulse racing. "Linda, please," Dad muttered, tugging at her arm, but she shook him off. "Mom, what are you doing?" I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. My cheeks burned, and I could feel every eye in the room on me. Sarah stood halfway up, her mouth open, unsure whether to intervene. Claire just stared at the floor, her hands clenched. Mom took a step forward, her voice trembling but firm. "You don't know everything, Ava. You don't know who he really is." She pointed at Ethan, and the accusation hung in the air like smoke. Ethan's face paled, his eyes darting between me and Mom. "Linda, sit down," he said, his voice low but edged with something I'd never heard before. Fear, maybe? The murmurs grew louder now, a wave of whispers crashing through the pews. Ethan's mom, Diane, stood up, her face a mix of shock and anger. "Linda, this is not the time," she snapped, her voice shaking. But Mom didn't back down. "Oh, it's exactly the time, Diane. You think you can just sweep this under the rug?" The words hit like a slap, and I felt my knees wobble. Sweep what under the rug? What was she talking about? I looked at Ethan, searching his face for answers, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Ethan, what's going on?" I asked, my voice cracking. Before he could answer, Claire stood up, her face pale. "Mom, stop it," she hissed, but there was something in her tone. Guilt, maybe? She glanced at the stranger in the back, and I swear I saw her flinch. The man hadn't moved, but his eyes were locked on Ethan now, unblinking, like a predator sizing up its prey. Father Michael raised his hands, trying to calm the room. "Please, everyone, let's take a moment," he said, his voice gentle but firm. But the tension was a living thing now, coiling tighter with every second. Mom took another step forward, her voice rising. "Ava, he's not who you think he is. He's been lying to you. To all of us." The words landed like a punch, and I felt my breath catch. Ethan's hands dropped mine, and he turned to face her, his jaw tight. "That's enough, Linda," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Mom laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Oh, I know plenty, and so does he." She nodded toward the stranger in the back, and every head in the church turned to look at him. The man stood slowly, his presence commanding the room without a word. He was tall, his suit slightly wrinkled, his face etched with lines that spoke of a hard life. He didn't look at me, only at Ethan, and when he spoke, his voice was steady, but cold. "She's right, Ava. He's not who he says he is." The room erupted in gasps, and my heart plummeted. I looked at Ethan, my vision blurring with tears. "Tell me they're wrong," I whispered. "Tell me this is a mistake." But Ethan's silence was louder than any words, and the truth began to claw its way to the surface. The stranger's words hung in the air, sharp and heavy, like a blade poised to fall. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I turned to Ethan, my voice trembling. "Ethan, say something." His face was pale, his eyes wide, darting between me, the stranger, and my mother. The church was a sea of shocked faces, whispers buzzing like static. Father Michael stepped forward, his hands raised, trying to reclaim control. "Please, let's all remain calm," he said, but his voice wavered, betraying his own unease. The stranger took a step down the aisle, his gaze never leaving Ethan. "You want to tell her, or should I?" he said, his voice low but carrying through the room like a thunderclap. Ethan's jaw clenched, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes I didn't recognize. Not fear, not guilt, but defiance. "You don't get to do this, Tom," Ethan spat, his voice shaking with anger. Tom. The name hit me like a jolt. Who was Tom? Why did Ethan know him? My mother's voice cut through again, sharp and accusing. "Ava, he's been lying to you from the start. Tom knows the truth. Tell her, Tom. Tell her who he really is." My stomach twisted, and I felt Sarah's hand on my shoulder, steadying me as my legs threatened to give out. Diane, Ethan's mom, was on her feet now, her face flushed with fury. "This is outrageous! You're ruining their day!" she shouted. But Mom just shook her head, her eyes blazing. "No, Diane, he's the one who ruined everything." Tom cleared his throat, and the room fell into a deafening silence. Every eye was on him, and I could feel the weight of their stares pressing against me. "Ava," he began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion, "I'm your father." The words hit like a tidal wave, knocking the air from my lungs. My knees buckled, and Ethan caught me, his hands firm but cold. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. I looked at my parents, Linda and Robert, sitting in the third pew, their faces ashen. Dad's head was in his hands, and Mom's eyes were wet with tears, but she didn't deny it. Father Michael stepped closer, his expression shifting from confusion to something deeper, like he'd been waiting for this moment. He raised a hand, his voice gentle but firm. "Tom, please continue." Tom nodded, his eyes softening as they met mine. "Ava, I didn't know about you until a few years ago. Your mother, Linda, and I were together before she married Robert. She never told me she was pregnant. I only found out when I ran into Claire last year, and she let it slip." My sister, Claire, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The pieces started to fall into place, jagged and sharp. I turned to Ethan, my heart racing. "Did you know?" I demanded, my voice breaking. His silence was answer enough. His eyes dropped to the floor, and I felt a crack run through my heart. "Ethan, did you know?" I repeated, louder this time. He finally looked at me, his face a mask of guilt. "I found out a few months ago," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tom contacted me. I didn't know how to tell you, Ava. I thought it would break you." The room spun. My mother's voice broke through the haze. "He's not good enough for you, Ava," she said, her tone softer now, almost pleading. "He knew the truth and kept it from you. He's been lying this whole time." The betrayal stung, but it wasn't just Ethan. My parents, Linda and Robert, had lied to me my entire life. Robert wasn't my father, Tom was, and they'd all kept it from me, letting me walk into this day blind. Father Michael stepped to the center, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm. He took the microphone, his voice steady but thick with emotion. Ava, Ethan, everyone, he began. This is a moment of truth, not just for this family, but for all of us here. Secrets have a way of unraveling, but they also open the door to healing. He paused, looking at me with kind eyes. Ava, your heart led you here today, to love and to truth. What happens next is up to you. The room was frozen, every breath held, every eye on me. I felt exposed, raw, like the world had peeled back my skin. Ethan reached for my hand, but I pulled away, my mind reeling. You knew, I said again, my voice shaking with hurt. You knew and didn't tell me. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't argue. The crowd was a mix of shock and pity. Sarah's face was streaked with tears, Diane's hands covered her mouth, and Claire looked like she wanted to disappear. My mother stood, her voice softer now. Ava, we were trying to protect you, she said, but the words felt hollow. Robert finally looked up, his eyes red. I raised you as my own, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't want to lose you. Tom, still standing in the aisle, looked at me with a quiet sorrow. I just wanted a chance to know you, he said simply. I looked at Ethan, then at my parents, then at Tom. The truth was out, jagged and messy, but it was out. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling. I need time, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. But I'm not giving up on this. I turned to Ethan, my heart aching but resolute. We're talking about this later, all of it. He nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. The ceremony continued, quieter now, but with a strange sense of clarity. Ethan and I said our vows, our voices shaky but sure. The guests clapped, some hesitantly, others with warmth. My parents stayed, though their faces were heavy with shame. Tom slipped out before the reception, leaving a note with Sarah that simply said, I'm here when you're ready. In the weeks that followed, life didn't snap back to normal like in some fairy tale. The reception was awkward, a mix of forced smiles and hushed conversations. People hugged me a little too tight, their whispers of congratulations laced with pity. Ethan and I danced our first dance under string lights in the garden behind the church, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the revelations like a broken record. My parents approached me later that night, their faces etched with regret. Mom's eyes were swollen from crying, and Dad, Robert, pulled me into a hug that felt both familiar and foreign. We should have told you sooner, he said, his voice rough. I've always seen you as my daughter, Ava. That doesn't change. I nodded, but the words stuck in my throat. Forgiveness wasn't instant. It was a slow burn, something I'd have to work at. Tom and I met a few days later at a quiet coffee shop in Albany. He was nervous, fidgeting with his cup, but his stories filled in the gaps of my life. How he and Mom had been young and reckless. How she'd left without a word. He didn't blame her, not entirely. Life's messy, he said, his smile sad. But I'm glad I found you now. We've been building something since then. Tentative lunches and phone calls, piecing together a relationship that was stolen from us. Claire confessed her part in it all. She'd known for months, torn between loyalty to Mom and Dad, and the truth. We argued, we cried, but we're sisters. We found our way back. Ethan and I? That was harder. The lie he kept gnawed at me, a shadow in our new marriage. We talked for hours that night, raw and honest, no more secrets. He explained how Tom had reached out, begging him to keep quiet until after the wedding, afraid of ruining everything. I thought I was protecting you, Ethan said, his voice breaking. But protection built on lies is just another cage. We went to counseling, unpacked the hurt, and slowly rebuilt trust. Our love wasn't shattered, it was tested, and it held. Today, we're stronger for it, living in a cozy apartment in the Hudson Valley, planning a future that feels real, not picture perfect. Looking back, that day in the church taught me something profound about family and love. We build our lives on stories we tell ourselves, about who we are, who we belong to. But secrets? They're like cracks in the foundation, waiting to split wide open. My parents thought they were shielding me from pain, but all they did was delay it, letting it fester. Ethan believed silence was kindness, but truth, even when it hurts, is the only way forward. And me? I learned that walking down the aisle alone wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the first step toward claiming my own story. Family isn't just blood or vows, it's the people who choose to stand by you, flaws and all, and work through the mess. If there's one thing I'd say to anyone listening, it's this. Don't wait for a wedding or a crisis to uncover your truths. Talk to your loved ones, ask the hard questions, and face the answers head on. It might silence a room, it might break your heart for a moment, but it could also set you free. Life's too short for hidden resentments and unspoken regrets. Embrace the chaos, forgive where you can, and build something honest from the ruins. As I wrap up this story, I can't help but wonder, what secrets have shaped your life? Have you ever had a family revelation that changed everything? Share in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and maybe even find some common ground. And if this tale of twists and turns kept you hooked, hit that subscribe button for more real-life dramas and heartfelt reflections. Thanks for joining me on this journey. Until next time, take care.